Hey everyone, thanks for virtually attending our River Rally session on watershed signage. My name is Kelly Knutson at the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. We're also joined by Jeff Skelding at Friends of the Upper Delaware, along with Emily Nurl at Delaware Nature Society. You'll hear from both of them later today in the presentation. So over the next 15 minutes, we'll highlight two successes of enacting signage in the Delaware River Watershed, one being in the state of New York, while the other in Delaware State. At the end, after you hear from each speaker, we'll also answer just some common questions that we've received along the way. So I'll start and kick us off by just providing an overview of the signage project and the desired outcomes. So for background, the Delaware River Watershed, spanning across 4 basin states, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, is a prized natural resource that provides 13.3 million people with clean drinking water, while contributing 25 billion to the economy and creating over 600,000 jobs annually. So as a lifeblood of the region, it only makes sense to accentuate watershed boundaries and really bring attention to this treasured resource. And in conjunction with our state lead organizations on the call, the coalition set to erect entering the Delaware River watershed signs along major roadways that intersect with the watershed's boundaries in the 4 basin states. So before this initiative, signage really didn't exist, and it did exist when you enter the Chesapeake, but very few for the Delaware River Basin. And through signage, we aim to promote the watershed's importance and benefits, helping to improve water quality, the economy, along with the tourism industry, et cetera. We felt that these efforts would not only benefit residents and local businesses, but also add value to the tourists as they're passing through. So in order to achieve our goals, working with relevant government officials, agencies, and partners would be critical for this project's success. So each state's Department of Transportation was especially important in meeting safety, feasibility, and just signage standards. So to promote uniformity across the watershed, our shared request in each state was for the standard green and white signs, which was shared on the screen earlier. So in an effort to showcase the success of the project installation, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Emily just to discuss the process and celebration that happened in their respective states. So let's kick it off with the Upper Delaware in New York. Take it away, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Kelly. As Kelly said, I'm Jeff Skelding. I'm Executive Director of Friends of the Upper Delaware River. We're up here in Western Catskills and Southern tier of New York, and we're very happy to be the state lead agency, or state lead group for the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. It was the CDRW that kind of planted this idea in our mind, and we felt like it was a good one. And one of the challenges we face in New York is it's a big state with a lot of iconic water bodies, right? There are many, many water bodies, including the Great Lakes and the Long Island Sound. And we happen to be sandwiched right in between the mighty Hudson River watershed and the Chesapeake watershed. So we struggle all the time to maintain our profile here. And we felt this was a great idea. One way to really achieve that objective was to get some signage, particularly because both of the watersheds to our east and west have had signage for decades, right? And so every time we drive around, we kind of got a little jealous and we thought, hey, it's our turn. So let's do this, right? So Kelly mentioned the advantages of this. I think the signage really what it does is it gives both visitors to the region and people who live here a sense of place, right? And a sense of pride of the watershed they live in. We all talk about watersheds all the time. Well, let's do some of the basic things. Let's put a sign up that tells you where you are, right? And so that made sense to a lot of people that we had to organize. And so, that's what we did. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, and all the successes that I've been involved with really come down to one common denominator, and that's effective grassroots organizing, right? And that's what we did. We've already built some coalitions around the Upper Delaware River watershed. We met some new folks. We got the buy-in to the idea from multiple organizations and different watershed stakeholders. And then after that, we had to do some fundamental things like figure out who can do this for us, right? Who's going to be able to put these signs together? Turns out, as Kelly mentioned, it was the New York State Department of Transportation. And we also needed a little partnership in there with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. We needed both of those agencies to kind of give the nod to it. But it was the Transportation Department that had the jurisdictional authority to make it happen. And we also engaged our very enthusiastic river champion, Congressman Antonio Delgado, in the effort. and our state legislators that represent districts in the upper Delaware River watershed, who are also very, very helpful. So we had the public organized, we had the organizations organized, we built the political momentum. We had an initial meeting, Kelly was there, where we kind of ran it by the transportation department. We had no idea what to expect, right? We thought, being the cynical longtime activist that I am, I thought they would say, no way. But I think we caught a break. A long time ago, the state of New York went through some exercise where they identified which water bodies would actually be eligible for signage. And lo and behold, the upper Delaware River was on the list. So that cleared the way. That really cleared a lot of what I expected to be significant bureaucratic hurdles. And then we started moving. And in the end, after letters and meetings and several months, the transportation department worked very well with us. And now we have 14 signs around the perimeter of the upper Delaware River watershed in New York State to say, entering the Delaware River watershed. We wanted them to say upper Delaware River watershed, but their standards and codes prevented that. We kind of had to live with that. Kelly came up, or we actually, because of the pandemic, we did a virtual press conference. We involved the congressman. We made the announcement. It was just really, it was just a feel-good story, and a surprisingly quick success, because as we all know, all of our campaigns in this world of environmentalism and conservation tend to be very difficult and challenging. This one was actually on the easier side, and all of us had a lot of fun doing it. So we're glad the signs are up, and we look forward to future activities around the signs, and hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion about what that might be at the end of the meeting. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, New York was the first in the watershed to enact signs and certainly paved the way for others like Delaware to follow in its footsteps. So I'll turn it over to Emily to highlight some of Delaware's efforts.
Please tell me you can edit that out.
I can, no worries.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. Happy to join Jeff and happy to join you to be part of the conversation. So we had some very similar experiences in Delaware. One of the things that Jeff said that I really want to reinforce is that for the first conversation, you want to invite a bunch of people around the table. You want to build on your relationships. We worked really hard. So the first meeting we had, Kelly, you attended as well. DelDOT was there, the Delaware Department of Transportation, and there were about 25 people around the room talking enthusiastically, and it very quickly went from a, hey, can we do this conversation, to how we can do it. And that's because I think we showed DelDOT that we were very serious. And then the next piece is we connected with the Deputy Cabinet Secretary's office, which I think was really important to do as well. So we were talking to what I would call the line staff, the program staff that would support it, authorize it, that kind of thing, but that we went to the top as well to make sure that we had the leadership. And then the final thing that I think went really well is we connected with our governor's office. And so because just like up in New York, there's massive Chesapeake Bay watershed signs in Delaware, and there were no Delaware River watershed signs, we gave them the opportunity. We turned it into an education opportunity, if that means. I love my governor. Oh, can you edit that out? That didn't sound right.
You totally can, yeah.
Okay, edit that out. So in Delaware, our governor is actually active in the Delaware River watershed. He's actually chair of the Basin Commission Group, but I'm not sure they and DelDOT knew exactly how many people were served by the watershed, how much of our water is tied to it, how much of our economy is tied to it. So doing the signs was actually an opportunity not only to educate the regular public, but to educate DelDOT and our governor's office and leaders as well. And the final thing that was really helpful is the governor's office wanted to announce a new litter campaign. So we did a combined press event that included the governor, included the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, and we invited the local Speaker of the House, P. Schwarzkopf, who's the Speaker of the House for the state of Delaware. It was his district, so he came in as well. And we had placement of multiple signs. Our next step is these were placed last fall. Our next step is to reach out to the state legislators whose signs are physically in their districts and arrange a photo op. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to put that on hold. But I'm hoping this summer we can use the Delaware River watershed signs as an opportunity to educate our state legislators on the importance of the watershed.
So many great opportunities ahead. So thank you both, and kudos on all the great work. We can transition to the dialogue portion of the presentation. And I'll start just by answering what's probably on everyone's mind. What about New Jersey and Pennsylvania? So proposals for both states have been submitted to DOT agencies. Unfortunately, like Emily said, the pandemic hit and priorities and funding sources shifted for these states. But we're staying optimistic and hope to just continue this effort in the near future. So stay tuned. But question for you, Jeff and Emily, looking back, what tips can you share with anyone wanting to replicate this project in their state or their watershed?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit maybe, but just to synthesize a response there, I think you have to find this sweet spot between building support for the idea, but also not getting out in front of the jurisdictional agency. At least in our case, I felt like if I felt like we had to involve the Department of Transportation and the Department of Environmental Conservation in a way where they felt in control of the process. The public support was demonstrated, but that they had a clear jurisdictional leadership role, and that we weren't threatening that in any way, right? We were just kind of building good vibes around the whole thing and nudging them along at every turn. And when they got lazy about returning phone calls, we very politely reminded them this is still of high interest to multiple watershed stakeholders, and we kind of found the rhythm on that. And I think that's just an organizing principle across the board, but we really didn't want the Department of Transportation, that doesn't typically deal with the conservation department or conservation community, at least here in the work we do, that we needed them to feel comfortable and in charge, but also that there was a demonstrated public will.
Mhm. And I think the only thing I would add to that, Kelly, is we had to use the opportunity to educate them, as I had said, DelDOT and the governor's office, on why these signs matter and how sending a message about how big the watershed is in Delaware and what it means to Delaware was really important. And it was kind of getting them to the point of saying, oh, wow, this really is worth doing, and willing to spend their own resources, because just like New York, DelDOT designed, paid for, and placed the signs.
Yeah, critical piece to the puzzle for sure. So, you already kind of talked about this, but now that signs have been installed, what's next? Just because you put in a sign doesn't mean that education's there. People are, aware of the watershed and all of its entities and benefits. How do you want to utilize them moving forward and engage with either legislators, communities, other offices, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things, now that we're not post-COVID, but the thing's getting a little bit regular back to normal. As I said, one thing we want to do is use it as an opportunity to educate our legislators and to get them excited. So what we want to do, we actually have a list of where the signs are and whose district it is. And so this summer, what we're going to do is we're going to reach out to those legislators and say, hey, meet us at the sign. And then we're going to take some photos and we're going to post it in our social media and stick it on our website. And the other thing too is we have the Clean Water Campaign, Delaware's Clear Choice, and we're going to be weaving that messaging into the Clean Water Campaign. One of our ongoing goals is to educate people, frankly, on what a watershed is. And that's a place that we need to be doing more about, and building upon these signs. I think it creates a great momentum.
Always more education can happen for sure. Good points, Emily. Jeff, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I'm just going to say what Emily said. Because of the pandemic, well, first of all, we're in a very rural part of the watershed. The entire area is rural. So generating media coverage and getting the word out that way is difficult always. Then throw the pandemic on top of it. We did a nice job with a virtual press conference. We had some pretty good attendance, but it just wasn't, I think we need to do more. There are 14 signs out there that just appeared, and we get occasional, emails or texts saying, hey man, I saw this sign. It wasn't there last week, but then, we need to sort of grab that energy a little bit more and keep and organize it a little better. And I like Emily's idea. Let's do it around the state legislators. I mean, how perfect is that? They love that stuff, right? So, I can see us doing, once we get back into some sense of normalcy here, I could see us organizing some press events, on site, ribbon cutting kind of thing with the pictures and all the fun stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting to think what can happen for sure. And it's a good example of cross-state collaboration and really replicating something that happened in the upper part of the Delaware and replicating that in the lower end as well. But is there anything else that you two want to share or talk about as we near our end of the presentation?
I think the only thing I would add, Kelly, is to encourage people to connect with non-traditional partners, if that makes any kind of sense. Like we had a county councilwoman come to the table who's also active in the plastics area and in preventing, among other things, plastic in waterways. And so thinking about involving EJ community members and more, not just people focused specifically on the watershed, but people focused on water issues in general and water quality issues as well. It just kind of raises the temperature and raises the voices.
Great point. Jeff, anything you want to add or share?
Yeah, you both talked about the tourism economy. That couldn't be more important than where we are. And I know up and down the river, it shows up as a very important, use of the river and value to the local communities. Up here, it's from April to October, it's the lifeblood of a lot of these communities. And so involving, we have these tourism bureaus or local officials. They're all interested in this for reasons we don't prioritize, right? But it doesn't matter because it's all, everyone's coming together to push the same thing ahead. So that's a great point about just different, representatives that have an interest in the watershed that may not be from our conservation community.
Certainly, we can always find a way to engage new voices and make our processes more inclusive. Well, thank you both. That's all the time that we have for today, but I appreciate everyone joining us virtually for River Rally, and I hope that you enjoy this year's experience. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So I will stop recording.
All right. Oh my God.